You're listening to Like and Follow podcast, presented by Mobile Digital.
Welcome to Like and Follow, a podcast exploring social media and digital marketing, presented by Milk Bar Digital. I'm Ben, and on this episode, we're talking all things copywriting. To join me to do that today is one of our social media coordinators here at Milk Bar. This is Carmela.
Hi.
Mela, this is a pretty interesting topic that we're going to be covering here, because a lot of people think about copywriting as just like subsidiary or in addition to what the actual content is saying. But what do you think is the purpose of copywriting in social media?
Cool. Yeah. So I believe that copywriting is, essentially your voice as a brand or a business, and it's how your audience really hears, or I suppose more appropriately, like reads you online. So it can really affect how well they respond to you and your content. So, I feel like the overall purpose of copy is to either entertain or inform or persuade in some way. I feel like these days, it's just as important to have good copy as it is to have, amazing visuals. So, the way I like to look at it personally is that having, great creative and visuals, that's great for getting people's attention, but copy is what's going to keep it. And, video is a whole other thing, that's a whole other play field. But when it comes to stills and graphics and, even photos in general, copy and creative really have to work hand in hand. And I feel like when copy, if it's done well, it can really turn, readers who are just passing through into really loyal customers.
Do you find that there's often a correlation between how good the copy is and to how often people will engage with a post?
Definitely, yeah. Like having a good image is going to be what stops someone from scrolling through the feed. But once they start reading your copy, if they connect with you, they're likely to comment or, even just give a like, and, that can really up your engagement.
Is there anything that you think it will keep that attention from people in the copy? Like, are there certain words that would work better for a certain type of post?
Yeah, so I think it will depend on your messaging, but really, I suppose speaking to your audience rather than at your audience is a good way to keep their attention. So yeah, definitely.
When we say talking to an audience rather than at, we're sort of looking at how the language is used.
Yeah, definitely. So like, even when it comes to, I suppose, talking about your product, instead of just listing all, the product features, which, people can easily find, talking about how it helps your audience and like who it's helped in the past is a really good way to sort of like rope your audience into learning more about you and your brand.
We've sort of seen how copy has sort of evolved in the past, 10, 20, 50 years of however long it's been around. And on social, it's a very different space as well. What are some of the things that you think have helped that evolution of copywriting?
So, since the beginning, like you said, copy has always sort of been about using text to advertise or market something. And like you said, it's something that's very fluid and it's constantly evolving. And I feel like that's based on trends and also, audience behavior, because audiences sort of shift and evolved over time as well. And, when people started writing online content, particularly for things like blogs, we could see that there was this idea to stuff as many keywords as possible into the copy so that you could rank high on Google, which is, understandably, because SEO is definitely, up there in people's minds, and it's important to rank well on Google so that you can be found that way. But I feel like as time has gone on, copy is becoming more conversational, and, we're back to storytelling. And, ever since Google changed their algorithm, copywriters have had to write high quality content that's made for humans to read rather than, search engine bots to kind of sift through.
Do you feel that the change in an algorithm has sort of pushed copy into a new direction?
Yeah. So like I said, people writing copy are definitely starting to move into that more conversational tone where it sounds like you're talking to a human rather than, trying to flag a search engine bot to like see your site and put it up on Google. And I feel like a part of the reason why we are moving into this sort of conversational tone is because audiences are getting really smart. They're getting smarter about knowing when they're being sold to, and they're becoming more attuned with, marketing tactics. So they're more likely to want to engage and respond to a brand that they connect with rather than one that they don't, or one that they can see is kind of just stuffing their copy with these keywords because they're trying to write for a search engine rather than their audience.
I think that's a really good point that you bring up, that audience are getting smarter and they're sort of learning a lot about how marketing techniques work. Is it a matter of using those techniques in a new way, or is it more completely throwing out the old techniques and trying to develop these new conversational style of copywriting that's going to help copywriters and copy move towards the future?
I think it's a bit of both. I think you can definitely take what we've learned in the past about copywriting, kind of mold it into this new conversational tone. And, another reason why it's becoming such a big thing is because of voice engine search. I don't know about you, but I use Siri quite a lot. And this really ties into knowing how your audience thinks, how your audience sort of speaks, and I suppose the kind of language that they use. So writing copy for voice engine search as well is something that, I feel like copywriters could really be thinking about because, for example, when I'm talking to Siri, I'm more inclined to say something like, "Hey Siri, what's the weather like today?" as opposed to being just like, "Hey Siri, weather." Voice engine search just has a more conversational tone to it, just naturally. So, that's another thing that copywriters can kind of tap into if they want to sort of reach their audiences through that sort of medium.
Obviously, if we're working towards becoming a more conversational style of copywriting, how do you feel that emojis are working in terms of copy? A lot more people are using them in everyday conversation.
A way that we've seen brands in the past engaging in more conversational tones is by the use of emojis. And I think that they're a really great tool. I love using emojis, whether it's in my own sort of social media or whether it's for a client. But I feel like when it comes to the use of emojis, it's really important to understand and only use them when it's relevant to your message or, your brand and sort of the tone of the content that you're putting out, because, you don't want to be posting something really heavy and something really serious and then kind of just like bombarding it with emojis that don't really have anything to do with it. It might just rub your audience the wrong way, or, it might not get the point across that you want. So it's definitely a great tool, but just being very mindful about how you use them and making sure that they're really relevant to what you're trying to say.
So, all right, so we've talked a lot about how copy has changed, but what are some of the things that we can look at to see how to make that copy work for us? How can we make that copy the best that it can possibly be?
Well, let's take blog posts, for example, but these are things that I suppose you could really use across all types of copy, including social media. But when it comes to blog posts, copy starts at the start. So the headline, for example, when it comes to your social media captions, it's that first sentence that's going to really capture your audience's attention and make them want to read more, especially if it's a long form caption. Your headline or your first sentence needs to be really sort of interesting and relevant enough that it'll get your audience's attention. It will make them click on that post, or it'll make them, click read more. And I mean, like, have you ever sort of clicked on a blog post that A, had nothing to do with the information you're looking for, or B, just wasn't interesting at all? Like, making a headline as useful and as specific as you can is really great. I mean, take something like how to write a blog post versus 10 tips to write brilliant blogs. Someone might be looking for ways to write, for tips on how to write a blog, but 10 tips to writing brilliant blogs will make them think, oh, this blog will have actionable items that I can actually use to write a blog that people will actually read, instead of, something that's sort of just skimming through the bare minimum. And I feel like something like that would, from like a reading the title perspective, that feels like something that would just be more informative and more useful, and something that I would be more likely to click on.
It does seem like people are much more approachable to the idea of a list of items that helps them do something, rather than a general, here's how to do something.
Definitely. And it's also because, like, when you click on those types of, I suppose, titles, you know exactly what you're going to get out of it. So that when you sort of click on it, this is what you'll get. And then, it's just a lot easier that way.
What other sort of tips do you think are useful for people when they're writing copy?
I think one thing you could do, and I think this goes through pretty much anything with content marketing, is to really tap into who your audience is and the way that they think. Like what would they type into Google search? What kind of language would they use, or what kind of language would they respond well to? That's still sort of like really on brand for you. And like we said before, another tip would be to write as succinctly as possible. And this doesn't mean to always just constantly write really short form captions or really short form content. What I mean by writing succinctly is to just eliminate powerless words, or words that don't provide any value and are really just there to sort of beef up the sentence for no particular reason. Using active sentences versus passive sentences is a good way to kind of keep sentences short and straight to the point. But yeah, I believe that there's, been some debate over whether long form or short form captions are better than the other. And from my standpoint, I feel like it really would just depend on who you are as a brand, the kind of messaging that you want to put out there and the kind of content as well as, of course, like who your audience is. Are they more likely to respond to a short form caption, or are they more likely to read through a long form caption and not really mind that it takes a little more time? On a platform like Twitter, where the word count we all know is a lot shorter than other platforms, you're going to want to be as short and sweet and succinct as possible to get as much of that valuable information into your caption as quickly as you can. You don't want to waffle on a platform like Twitter. Whereas on a platform like Instagram, we've seen brands and individuals use it as sort of like a microblog or a mini blog. They write these long form captions, and the beauty of that is that you get to really tap into storytelling in that way. Like I said before, instead of just listing all your product features, you talk about, how it's actually provided value and how it's actually helped people. And, those are the kinds of captions that I feel like when it comes to storytelling, your audience is more likely to sort of react to or respond to really well. Some people can get away with just putting emojis, and other people just want to sort of inject as much sort of information as they can into their captions. And I suppose if it works for you and if it works for your brand and what you're trying to get across, then either way could really sort of play to your strengths.
I think it's also worth mentioning as well, in terms of general copywriting, it's always good to have somebody else have a look at it, and
Definitely.
just get that second set of eyes on it, because grammar and spelling is incredibly important, and you can waste a lot of people's time with bad spelling and bad grammar.
I totally agree. And, like if you publish a piece and it's got, a bunch of typos or sentences that don't make sense, or like it's tone deaf to sort of the social climate or your audience, that's a really, really quick way to sort of lose credibility in your space. And that's something that, of course, brands and businesses would want to avoid. So I think something to really keep in mind is never to really underestimate the power of good copywriting, because, it's so powerful in the way it can sort of influence and persuade and like really affect people. So having a second set of eyes to like look over is a really, really important thing, because it's not something that you want to get wrong.
I think nothing exists in a vacuum anymore. We're so interconnected. So it is important to think about that, especially when you're writing copy.
Exactly. Definitely.
Well, that's probably going to bring us to an end for this episode of Like and Follow. Thank you so much for joining me, Carmel. I feel like we've learned a lot today.
No worries. Thank you for having me.
And thank you so much for listening and watching this episode of Like and Follow. If you're looking to give your copywriting a boost, Milk Bar Digital is here to help. You can get in contact with us at hello@milkbardigital.com.au, and remember to like and follow us on all the socials at Milk Bar Digital.